the two actually went hand in hand, and it was like I said, the transition was pretty easy for us because when we were doing the radio show, we also started doing the podcast in parallel, and so we got into a discipline, and this speaks a little bit to our process, where we would prep for every show. We would have basically a script or a brief for those guests and the topics, and those would then serve as not only a guide for the interviews that we would conduct, but also a framework for the email and the blog post and everything else we would do. So once the show's recorded, it's edited, we go in then and write the post, which then becomes the email, and all that content then is set in motion, and we propagate it in all different places on several different platforms.
Is any of that propagation automated, or?
To some degree, yes, and we're actually in the process of making it even more automated. So really, you only have to do the post one time, and then it shows up everywhere it needs to. And that's the nice thing about Facebook and Twitter having kind of reciprocal relationships now, where you post on one obviously, and you can have it show up on the other. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the time associated to each of those steps, the big steps in the process, the writing and the producing and the editing?
Well, step one is meeting the guest, so that can be anywhere between a 5-minute phone call to 2 or 3 weeks, up to a couple months of courting. But I will say over the past 5 years, we've formed relationships with groups. So if there is a PR representative, a firm, or if there is a specific brand like Landor, we have a partnership with them. And so anytime they publish a new report or have a new book out, they call us and let us know so we can bring them on the show. But if we're interested in a specific brand or know that there's a certain trend going out, we reach out to them. So getting the guest is number one. You really have to allow for the unknown there. And so there's always the planning ahead with the guests. But once you have them secured, a matter of putting the brief together or the script, just kind of bullets for us, that's about an hour's worth of time. And then that brief is then given to the host, so we're able to read over it, and then we go out on our own and obviously hit the worldwide portal and just figure out different avenues that we can gain more content from. So we are able to not only carry a conversation based on questions that the guest is prepped for, but things that are current and relevant. We like to keep our interviews. I will back up. The big thing from going live on air for 1 hour to bringing it in-house, we completely changed the format. So the brand show now is anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. And so we really like to keep the show very conversational. And so then the hosts do the prep, we get in, we record. Again, the interview itself is 10 to 20 minutes, but when the interview is over, Ethan and I actually sit in the studio, and then we post-record the introduction to the show, and then the outro to the show, where we talk about the insights and what we've gathered. And that takes just a few minutes. And then editing, it just really depends on how comfortable our guest was, because sometimes they know it's recorded, so if they fumble or they didn't quite understand the question, they'll go back and they have to edit that out. Every once in a while, we can be a little loopy too. I've introduced myself as Ethan Whitehill before and things of that nature, so we definitely have our fair share of bloopers.
That's personality.
Yeah. So the editing, a couple hours there, and then while things are being edited, right now, like Brooke, who we had, who's in charge of social media here at 2S,
He does an awesome job.
Yes. She actually sits in the interviews when they're happening, and she will tweet live. She'll make notes on great quotes and things of that nature, so we pass that off to the people doing copy and put it all together. And there's several people on the back end, so it's the audio editing, it's the writing of the copy for the e-blast. Brooke has all of her different outlets for social media, and then make sure that our list that we send out to you every week is not only up to date, so people opt out. We have that cleaned up, but it's also relevant to the group that we're trying to reach. So we have our brand show followers, but if we're talking about a specific industry, we want to make sure we have people on the list that are interested in that industry as well. So we try to make that personalized every week.
The other thing that has simplified our lives is just picking the right technologies.
Right.
For the longest time, we kind of wrestled with editing in GarageBand, and Audacity has really cleaned it up. We also had issues with our call-in guests because we were using them on just a voice over IP phone line, and that was a problem. And then we went to Skype, and it was much easier. So we love Skype. I think host prep is important. Like even though it is recorded, if we treat it like it's live, it's much cleaner and a lot easier to edit. So we kind of have to take it seriously when we get in the room, and when we don't, then it's Matt Cloud's issue, and he has to do more editing. We don't like to have him do that. I think all said and done, though, to put a time to all that, I'd say every show is maybe 3 to 4 hours, just in terms of prep, then the actual show, and then the editing, and broadcasting it out.
The key with that is, at least for us, is while it's 3 to 4 hours, it takes a village. There are 7 people involved, approximately 6 people involved to touch the show before it's pushed out. So that's a big thing.
The exception to that rule, though, is when we do it live on site. So one of the vehicles we've also found that's really great for the brand show podcasting, obviously, is doing it live from events. And when we go to trade shows, our new MO is not to go as Two West. There's could be another half a dozen or a dozen people like us there pitching and selling and doing all that. But if we go as the brand show, our access is exponentially better. People want to talk to us. And it's easy to line up conversations before we get to the show because we're going to podcast there. So we go in there with the attitude that we're press, we're going to be media, and we're going to talk to these people. We're going to learn something, and if they value that conversation, great. But it's a whole lot easier to start the conversation that way too. And when it happens at the show, we're clicking off probably anywhere from 5 to 10 people in a day, and a lot of times the interviews are back to back. So we just have to be kind of primed and ready to go. We usually have some idea of who we're talking to, and very minimal briefs that we walk into it with. And so we have maybe 5 minutes prep time before the next guest comes on when we interview, and off we're off.
And it's great on a road show just because you have that physical interaction with the person and eye contact. And so it's really lovely to be able to do it in 2 different venues and see the difference in the dynamic.
Yeah, this has been an idea that I've been tossing around for a while. I have a website called that we just recently launched a couple months ago called mobilelocalsocial.com, which is where everything's moving to. And I have an agency that I've been building as well. And so what I'd be curious about, I've been tossing around the idea of doing a podcast with this. How has that directly impacted, billable time and billable clients coming in the door? How is that?
But there's a plus minus on that because to your point about billable time, it's a chunk of time, and you have to go into it. Actually, I'm going to refer to this because I wrote down 8 things I learned about social media thanks to the brand show. And the first one is you have to go into it with an attitude of just curiosity and generosity. Our new business it's a great sort of byproduct of this if we have a conversation that goes somewhere. But more important to us, we're just curious as a company. And it's one of our core values, part of our DNA. Is this research that we do all the time, not only for our clients but ourselves, just to stay on top of the industry and on top of different categories we work with. And the brand show gives us that outlet. It's this kind of ongoing expert panel that we love to do because we learn from it every time we have a new guest, and then everybody else gets to listen in. And then the generosity piece is we feel like we're generally providing a service. We think that this is just part of who we are and it's a way to give back. And we were really wrestling with it, to be honest, in the beginning, because when we were doing it at the radio station, not only did we spend an hour in the station, we were commuting out to Overland Park, and most of us lived either downtown, midtown, or north of the river, or west or east. And there's another 2 hours of drive time just thrown in there. We said, wait, this has got to be easier. It's got to work differently. And that's when we made the decision to take it in-house. And I think process is really important. Everything we were talking about. I would say. But to your point, I think once we got our process down, and I would say, after 5 years of doing it, I'm really only comfortable with it in the last year.
That's the truth.
We've become a lot more streamlined. It's become a lot more efficient. And to that end, everything in business today is about your network and your connections. And we've got over 1,000 people in our LinkedIn group now with Brand Show, and that's just invaluable. Those are 1,000 first-person connections that are much bigger beyond that, and second and third, and it just gives us something we can tap into if we're headed to a market and we want to set some meetings. We go there. We go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become kind of a default sales tool for us, where it's just helped us that way. The other thing is it just from a billable time and billing standpoint, it's a way just to kind of put your money where your mouth is. It's a proof point to what we do and what we believe in, and we focus on certain industry categories.